Everybody here okay? Yes. Okay. Middlemarch by Krista Minard. Behind the graphic designer's ball-capped head, clear blue Hawaiian surf rolls onto shore, and palm fronds sway in a sun-soaked breeze. The designer sips a beverage, not an umbrella drink, but something in a coffee mug, and as he moves, a white smear outlines his head and reveals his real background. White walls, a stack of magazines, a floor lamp's triple shade, a golden retriever lying on a rumpled blanket. I've never Zoomed before. It's March 16th, and I sit by a real beach, a gray one, where the ocean churns between rugged sea stacks off the north coast of California. Rain drizzles the inn window. My laptop screen boomerangs my image, and I'm horrified. I go about the world with this chin and this neck and looking this pink-rimmed exhausted. I don't yet know how to touch up my appearance. I'm at an inn on the coast, but I'm at work. I've spent the past 5 days reconning trails for a story about coastal hikes for Sacramento magazine, where I'm the editorial director. Best kind of social distancing there is, Mike and I have crowed as we've worked our way north along Highway 1, from Jenner to Gualala to Point Arena to Mendocino, where we honeymooned 27 years ago, to Fort Bragg, then inland through a tangled forest, back out to Shelter Cove and the Lost Coast, then farther north to Eureka, Arcata, and Trinidad, on up to where the elk population surpasses the human one, moss climbs Fern Canyon walls, and redwoods blacken sunlight. Every time we've returned to cell coverage, incoming news has been bleaker. Bars and brew pubs closed, then restaurants and retailers and gyms and salons, per state and county health orders, and offices too. While we've been tromping around windswept headlands beside a thrashing sea, my coworkers have wrapped dusty computer parts with old cords and hauled them home. Sections of the magazine have fallen apart. Calendar of events, out, everything's canceled. Party pictures, out, same reason. Dining review of a hot new eatery in town, out. Dining listings, obsolete. Even my story about hikes has begun to disintegrate. State parks have all but shut down, and travel to smaller communities with few-bed hospitals that can't handle an influx of sick patients will soon be banned. Panic buying has stripped the shelves of hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, toilet paper. One coworker reveals via email that her husband purchased the only toilet paper he could still find online, just in case, and it's something industrial, each roll the diameter of a truck tire. We're not stocked up at home, and with us we carry a 2-ounce Dr. Bronner's hand sanitizer that's down to drips. So we've popped into Walgreens, CVS, mom and pop markets, hoping that up here in the sticks, people aren't as worried and something might be left. But shelves here yawn empty too. Mike and I decide we're not the fittest to survive. Too polite. Over the past few days, the ocean crashed against rocks as Mike and I traversed bluff-top trails. It roiled into caves and tiny coves, sloshing against cliffs, splashing seals and sea lions that lolled on offshore reefs. Wind whipped waves into whitecaps. On a couple of our travel days, rain lashed our windshield and poured off redwood boughs. And in one surreal experience, we drove into swirling snowfall a mile from the beach, and had to turn back, skidding on a road frozen white. What was the world coming to? That remains to be seen, of course. And on our first Sac Mag Zoom, we're shell-shocked. We learn to mute when the lawn guy's outside the window. We meet each other's dogs and cats and muse about home office spaces. We miss each other, and we express thanks for our health, for our jobs. Our community's respected alt-weekly newspaper, Sacramento News and Review, has ceased publishing its print edition, laid off most staffers, and put its proverbial hand out for donations. Our owner's plans include nothing of the sort, but our gratitude will dim in coming days as advertisers cancel and salary reductions ensue. This feels like 2009, a few staffers will say, careful not to complain when I break the news. After all, a few coworkers and friends have lost full-time status or their jobs completely. The day after that Zoom, Mike and I leave Trinidad and drive back to Sacramento. We're the last ones out. Our B&B has closed, keeping rooms open only to essential workers in need of a night's sleep. On the road, I plan a whole new magazine issue, the first of many pivots, by the light of my iPhone as we speed past fog-draped redwoods. Our tires hiss on slippery, wet pavement. Mike takes a crackling call and learns he's been laid off. He captains tour boats in San Francisco, and that city has shut down. We wonder what this means for our health insurance in a pandemic. From home, our 20-year-old daughter, who awaits word about the status of her classes at Sacramento State University and her movie theater job, goes grocery shopping and texts me photos of empty shelves. Mike and I stop at a Ray's in Garberville and score a few non-perishables: tortillas, beans, the last bag of pasta. Then we do 4 more hours in our car that reeks of spilled coffee and lavender hand sanitizer before we arrive in Sacramento. We're headed for the magazine office so I can grab my computer and files to take home when it hits us how much has changed in our 6 days away. It's 5 p.m. on St. Patrick's Day. At the E Street bottleneck on the Cap City Freeway, we're nearly alone on the road. Safety first, everyone.
Short legs upstairs. I'm markedly shorter. Graduation 2020 by Jan Haag. One bright day in mid-May, my neighbor Christine called to me as she hand-watered the proliferation of foliage that adorns her front yard. "Jan!" Her broad smile inspired one of my own. "The man will host graduation on Friday." I just pulled into my driveway and gotten out of my car. "Yeah?" I asked. "Well, you know, so many students can't attend ceremony this year," she said. I did know. For 7 weeks, I'd been teaching from home, spending a lot of time on one-on-one Zoom calls, encouraging, cajoling, pep-talking my journalism and creative writing students at Sacramento City College. You can finish the semester. You just have to complete. I'd assure them, trying to simplify things as much as possible. Students were gobsmacked by the invisible virus and its utter disruption of everything they knew. Everything, everyone, everywhere knew. The message had already begun to permeate our collective consciousness. It'll never be the same. The grief in their weary, zoomed-out faces seeped through the screen. I had told Christine about my student journalists who, despite the pandemic, were still doing outstanding reporting and photography for The Express, the college's online news site. They were also deeply disappointed that they couldn't don caps and gowns and march into Hughes Stadium to the cheers of their families and friends. "Well," she said, "maybe the man can help." The man is Christine's 6-foot-tall mannequin butler. He's a fixture at Halloween, when Christine transforms her yard into a cemetery with mummies rising from the ground, a witch's coven, or a vampiric beauty shop. The man dresses up for Easter and other occasions, often with signs and accompanying set pieces. "If you give me your students' names," she offered, "I'll put them out with the man too." Though I had no idea what she had in mind, my gratitude swelled. "Thank you so much," I said to her no big deal shrugs. The next day, I went to a dollar store to see what they had in the way of graduation swag. Alone in an aisle, I collected tall plastic cups, lanyards, and rubber ducks, all bearing 2020 grad messages. Christine spent much of the day and the next 2 days decorating, blowing up pink and black balloons to festoon the gazebo in her front yard. "I'm gonna dress the man in his gown." she winked at me, and I'll set up chairs with each of your students' names on them. That sounds great, I said. Friday about noon, after working online, I ventured outside. There stood the man, masked and tall, draped in a plastic graduation tablecloth cape next to folding chairs set about 6 feet apart. A silhouette of a graduate in cap and gown affixed to each chair, bearing a student's name. Crepe paper had joined the balloons on the gazebo, wrapped presents sat between each chair, along with facsimile diplomas and a box labeled gloves. A table in the driveway held an open book spray-painted gold, along with flowers and happy graduation signs. The lengths to which Christine had gone took my breath away. I took photos, felt my throat catch. Then I went inside to invite the graduates to the man's graduation ceremony. One of my former students and editors, Danielle, came by. She took in Christine's display. Texts began flying around the ether between Danny and her fellow graduates-to-be. Danny looked at me and grinned. They want to come by this afternoon at 3. Is that okay? Perfect, I said. At exactly 3 o'clock, 4 punctual young journalists arrived. Kelsey, Rose, Sarah, and Ben. Danny and I joined them, me in my cap and gown and cowl. An outfit I doubt I'll ever wear in another commencement ceremony. For years, I've volunteered at graduation with the college staffers who put on the event. They wear college t-shirts and help graduates before the ceremony with bobby pins for the caps and advice on tassels. Wear it on the right side of your cap until the president tells you, as a new graduate, then move it to the left. When it's time, the students line up in parallel rows and begin to walk to the stadium. Midway, they stop and flank a sidewalk near the North Gym. Before long, gowned and capped faculty and administrators walk between the rows of students. There are cheers and hugs before the students follow their teachers to the stadium and take their places in chairs on the track, their loved ones yahooing in the stands behind them. My graduating Express editors showed up Friday unrobed, uncapped, and masked. Though they unmasked as they posed for photos with the masked man, I handed out graduation swag and resisted the urge to hug them. They grinned and giggled, giddy as little kids. I stood, watching, thinking about how I could identify each of them by their writing or photos without looking at their bylines, knowing that wouldn't always be true. These students, like thousands of others I've taught, will fade into time. But I don't want them to. Like parents wishing to preserve their babies in that sweet state, I want to freeze the image of these students in those chairs, proud and beaming into the rest of their careers and lives. Tears leaked from the corners of my eye. I'd miss them. But we teachers want them to finish degrees, to become polished professionals with fulfilling careers and futures. We nurture them for a time, then they fly to the next challenge. Goodbye is the goal, but it's not always only sweet. After more than 3 decades of college teaching, I will retire about the time the 2021 commencement may or may not take place. Knowing these good students has shaped and sustained me, frustrated and enriched me. They have given me as much or more as I have them. They make my heart swell with gratitude, and they make me proud to call myself teacher. There is no greater title. Sourdough by Staats. In the first months of the plague year 2020, we are all baking. We post photos of our buttery, frosted, chocolate-laced efforts on Facebook. We wrap goodies in plastic and leave them on front porches, then text our friends, left a surprise outside your door, don't step on it, ha ha ha. We bake cookies, then pies, and cakes, and breads. We trade recipes. We complain about extra pounds, but who cares? Everyone's wearing sweatpants. Eventually, someone says, I think I'll try sourdough. We say, sourdough. The queen of bread. The pinnacle of baking. Simple, challenging, and infinitely rewarding to bake, I'm told. A magical conflation of flour, salt, water, and yeast. But not just any yeast. Never, never any commercial yeast. Instagram-worthy sourdough must be made with starter with which you must make from scratch. I have never tried this. The chocolate chip cookie recipe on the back of the bag of chips is my own personal pinnacle of baking. But sisterhood is powerful, and I am under a lot of pressure from my good friend and socially distanced walking partner, Edna. Edna is a superb baker. Her sourdough starter is more than 20 years old, a legacy of her late husband and his experiment with capturing the natural yeasts floating around in the air. Just hearing about this makes me slightly queasy. Who knows where those yeasts came from? They had cats, dogs, uncut hair. He seldom showered. But her bread is primo, tangy and crusty, and excellent, especially with a smear of butter. We walk several mornings a week, and each day I hope she's brought me a loaf. She texted me last night, I'm bringing you something special, adding several heart emojis. And this morning when we meet, she's carrying a loaf-sized paper bag. Open your trunk, she says, and scurries up and deposits the bag inside. I close the trunk. It's all been disinfected, she says. We observe the social distancing rules carefully. She's ultra careful about every directive. So I don't tell her that I never wait 24 hours before opening a mail or a package. As we walk, the day turns from fair, cool, and sunny to darker. The wind picks up. Clearly, it's going to rain, so we hurry back to our cars and air kiss goodbye from a safe distance, behind our masks. I can't wait to get home to coffee and Edna's incredible bread. And I'm a bit rushed as I say goodbye. She looks miffed, but waves cheerfully, like she always does. The rain's nearly sideways as I park the car in my driveway. I grab the bag from the trunk and tuck it under my sweater. No time to tear off a chunk. I'm focused on keeping it dry. But my door keys are lost somewhere in my pockets. I simply do not have enough hands. The bag falls to the brick step and there's a tinkling sound like glass breaking. And I think, oh no, she's included some of her incredible jam and now that's ruined. But at least the bread's still okay. And finally, I'm in my house. I love my usually sunny kitchen. Even if right now it's filled with the smell of burnt coffee because Mr. Coffee's been on for hours, and the rain outside makes me feel like I'm underwater. But the bread. I pull the butter from the refrigerator and reach into the bag, but instead of warm, firm crust, I'm feeling sludgy mess mixed with shards of glass and chunks of glass. When I dump it out, a little note flutters out. Thought you'd love making it yourself. Unscrew the cap and enjoy the fabulous yeasty smell. I will see your 4 exclamation points and raise you 2, I think, because there is no need to unscrew the cap. The grayish, malevolent goop is spreading out on my counter, slithering around the inconvenient remains of the jar, and the fabulous yeasty smell has wrecked itself into the farthest reaches of my senses. It's so fabulous. It makes me want to go wash everything with plenty of hot water and soap, because if that smell was coming from me, that's what I'd do. She's included the recipe and instructions for feeding the starter. Just add flour and water. Wait for the bubbles. The words have dissolved into the paper a bit. My phone buzzes. It's a few minutes before I hear it above the rain smashing in sheets against my roof. There's a crack of thunder overhead, so close and loud it rattles in the windows. My lights go out. Her text reads, "Let me know if you need any help," followed by way too many heart emojis for this situation. Sometimes I use heart emojis ironically, but Edna never does. So here is my dilemma, and also the baby beginning of an awful thought. Do I dump the mess into the trash and text her honestly that I dropped and broke her gift? Or do I pick out the biggest pieces of glass, scoop up the starter, feed it as instructed, and bake the damn bread? And give it to her. If I do the first, she'll just rush over with another jar of starter. If I do the latter, pieces of glass in the loaf could kill her. Of course, I won't bake the bread. Can't believe I'm even thinking about it. I scoop the mess into the trash and text her about it. "No, don't give me any more," I say. "I'd only find another way to mess it up. Ha ha ha. I'm a much better eater than a baker." Maybe she'll take the hint. See you next week. I sit in my dark kitchen in the early months of the plague year 2020. I hope things get better soon. I sure did want that bread.
Crossing the River by Anara Guard. It's getting on to dusk when I reach the river, and right away I want to turn around. Sure, I expected it to be dark, gloomy, and miserable, but not so foul-smelling. A nostril-curling brew of diesel, dank, and something dead. Trash is half submerged in an oily substance that is certainly not water, more like Jell-O, or what Victorian novels called aspic. Remember when the Cuyahoga River caught fire? Me neither, but I've heard about it. How the tire plants in Akron spewed into the water whatever is left over from melting down rubber. One day, the river ignited and couldn't be extinguished for weeks. I imagine someone tossed in a Bic lighter just for laughs. I can picture him standing on shore alongside his lousy, no-good buddies, all tight jeans and greasy hair, the light of youth already gone from their eyes. I've seen those guys, jobless, useless, loveless, boys with nothing to be proud of. They long for any thrill, no matter how destructive or crass. They might like the spot where I find myself now, trying not to gag behind my mask as I climb aboard, obedient as always. The captain lurks in the rear of the boat, his head drawn in between his shoulders like a turtle, a long-billed cat casting a shadow over his face. The lone crew member, he silently gestures to the blue X's marked with painter's tape on the bottom of the boat, signals that even here we must keep our distance. Not that I mind staying safely away from his uncovered nose and mouth. I retreat to the bow in a futile hope that the craft's movement will create a breeze to lift the fetid haze. But no, not even a ripple of air. The motor's sound is like nothing I've heard before. Not the gentle put-put of a fisherman going out at dawn in search of sunfish, or the steady throb when the engine gets going. This contraption seems to suck sound in and deaden it, an anti-noisemaker of sorts. How much further? I ask, my voice rusty in the thick air. I'm struck with the strange fear that the silent propeller can chop my words into meaningless syllables, and then, smaller still, into mere letters like a sour alphabet soup. The boatman gives no answer, but as he turns toward me, I recognize him. That face has been on the front page dozens of times. Every 4 years, he ran unopposed for re-election, becoming president of the state senate. But he had bigger ambitions, and a senator's salary was insufficient to realize them. When the university's chancellor was caught during a rest stop bathroom sting operation, the hunt was on for a replacement. The senator appointed himself chair of the search committee. Younger applicants were rejected on the grounds that they wouldn't stay long enough, while older ones were considered too frail to withstand the rigors of the position. After months of searching, and despite a lucrative contract to a headhunter, the chairman's brother-in-law, no suitable candidate was found. The committee was at an impasse. What to do? It was imperative that the position be filled before the next fiscal year began. And so the chairman, now my captain, made his move. He didn't need to suggest himself for the position. It was enough to remind the committee of the desirable qualities. Years of experience, deep familiarity with the Senate and its financial workings, the ability to lead, a well-recognized name. Clearly, there was only one man for the job, and at that moment, he was standing at the head of the table. The next day's headlines confirmed the deal. Senate Pres takes over the U. His first action was to triple the chancellor's salary, making him the highest paid official in the state. His pension would be based on this new salary, assuring himself an extremely comfortable retirement. I wrote a letter to the editor then, complaining about his greed and self-interest, but of course, nothing changed, and I stopped paying attention. And now he stands at the helm of this decrepit boat. This can't be how he spends his retirement. Or is it some kind of punishment? He hasn't asked me to pay any fare, and I wonder what he means to charge me. Perhaps he has figured out how to turn a profit here, too. It strikes me how alike the words chairman and Charon are. I've seen paintings of Charon, looking like death, all shrouded in his hooded robe, pointing ahead with a bony finger as he ferries passengers across the river Styx and away from the land of the living. My heart pounds in my chest. I've changed my mind. Take me back. A sneer crosses his careless, unmasked face, still tanned from years on the golf course. He glances at a gold watch on his wrist, not bothering to answer. Robbery comes in many guises. Some of us are held up by thugs with knives, while others are set upon by thieves who wield fancy pens and sign their names with a heavy, self-righteous hand. I know that rot only spreads more rot, and I know that I won't be his passenger any longer. I reach for an oar and swing it hard. The wood cracks loudly, breaking the silence like a wishbone snapping in two, like a martial artist breaking a board, like a door bursting open. The dark, thick water is too coagulated to form ripples. His body falls in without splash or sound. I take his place at the tiller, pulling one sleeve over my hand like a protective glove, careful of where he's touched. Slowly, the boat turns around. I'm bound for cleaner waters now, in search of the river's source. As the boat silently chugs upstream, I watch the shore for others like me, hoping to welcome them aboard. Breathing the Same Air by Maureen O'Leary. At my dad's funeral, there were work friends, neighborhood friends, church friends, theater friends, and my in-laws. Scattered about were former students, his ex-daughter-in-law, and the lady who cleaned his teeth. Dad's best work friend sat alone in back and left before the end. My mother said that his partner was home with something like pneumonia, and he didn't want anyone else to get infected. This was in early March, when the drumbeats of the pandemic were a mere vibration in our sternums. When I asked my mother if it was the coronavirus, she said she didn't think so. As for my dad, I always thought hospice was supposed to be a peaceful, stoned affair, with the dying person zoned out on morphine while everyone said plaintive goodbyes. No one warned me about the death rattle, a noise like stones in a bucket, or about how life holds on, clinging to the mast for days past the time when it would have been easier to just say goodbye and let go. My high school students knew my dad was dying. When I was called away to his deathbed, they were ready, forming an orderly single-file line and embracing me one by one. I walked out of the classroom smelling of the Axe and Pantene of 27 other people's teenagers. 2 weeks later, we would all be hunkered down inside our homes, giving anyone unrelated to us a distance of at least 6 feet. That moment, when my students were thinking of their own fathers, desperate with concern for what they imagined I must be going through, would take on the quality of a relic photo browned with age. I was a teacher who loved my students and was loved in return. This was the way we behaved before the virus. I might as well have stayed in class that day. The deathbed vigil went on for 2 more days, my dad's oxygen machine wheezing and beeping like a German disco. And though I had never been to a German disco, I imagined one would sound just as industrial and not entirely inharmonic. Meanwhile, his chest heaved as if he were running for his life, his stomach contracting like a bellows. The morphine ladies visited. The suppository ladies visited. "Don't give him water," my mother said to one who had a drop already. "He can't swallow." We didn't want to kill him while he was dying. My dad was yellow as old paper, stinking from a ferocious tumor on his neck. He was unconscious but not relaxed, as though dying was a stressful race to an elusive finish. There was pain there. There was a body crying for oxygen, not getting enough in one breath, needing to gasp for another and another. He finally stopped breathing on the 3rd day of hospice, my mother by his side. The fact that he is cremated is a comfort to me. I'm convinced that even embalmed, the man would be struggling to breathe. I know this isn't logical. 2 weeks later, I walked with my mother, my body a shield, guiding her to the lawns. Another walker approached without a mask. As we walked around the park, I recalled Dad's friend standing at the back of the funeral and leaving early, his own partner suffering at home. People who have survived COVID-19 have said how painful the disease is, how stressful, how impossible the virus makes the act of breathing. "Do you think that Dad's friend had the virus?" I asked. My mother said that perhaps he did, and how good it was of him to keep himself apart. How lucky we were to have been able to gather, so many of us hugging, sitting together, talking to one another in low voices, inhaling and exhaling, breathing the same air.
Can I get an amen? By Renee Thompson. In the autumn of 1973, 6 days after we married, my husband Steve and I moved from Sacramento to Trinidad on the coast of Northern California. On the western horizon, gray whales migrated from Arctic waters to the coastal lagoons of the southern Baja Peninsula, while sea urchins dotted the tide pools on wild, rocky shore. Our cabin, more of a lean-to, really, consisted of 1 room and a closet-sized bath. As Steve and I lay side by side on our threadbare mattress, we listened to sea lions barking, their vocalizations, along with the wind gusting through the clapboard slats of the cabin. It was cold on the coast in mid-September, and the heater worked only intermittently, cranking no more than a tuft of warm air as it wheezed and coughed and bellowed. Despite our rapture as newlyweds, we often wore sweatshirts to bed. One evening, just before Thanksgiving, Steve and I came down with what we thought was the flu. He was nauseated and I had a headache. We crawled between the sheets and gazed at each other, speculating who looked worse. "You do," Steve said. "No, you do." I smiled, although there wasn't much funny about it. When the pounding in my head reached its crescendo, I got up to take an aspirin. As I opened the medicine cabinet door, I fainted. When I opened my eyes, Steve was on one knee, leaning over me, hand on my shoulder. "What happened?" "I don't know. I just went down. I hit my head on the floor." I don't remember why Steve thought to open the windows and call our landlord. But right away, he suspected something was wrong with the heater. Within minutes, our landlord was in our cabin, tinkering with the rusted contraption. "That ought to do it," he said, brushing his hands. There was something about the speed and nonchalance of his repair that made us nervous. The next day, we bought an electric heater. After a week, the landlord appeared again to tell us his power bill had spiked and that he wondered if we had bought an electric heater. We wondered if he had been inside our cabin without our permission. After Christmas, we moved to an apartment in Arcata. One Sunday, about a month in, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, reading the morning paper. Flipping the pages, I noticed an article about a young college student who had been found dead in Trinidad. The boy's address belonged to the cabin where we had lived. Authorities, the paper said, believed his death was drug-related. "Steve," I said, "you need to read this." He scanned the column, then his eyes met mine. "The heater," he said. "We need to call the police." Eventually, there was a grand jury investigation. I don't remember the particulars. This was 47 years ago. But I do recall sitting with Steve outside the courtroom, waiting for him to testify. We later learned the young man died exactly as we thought he did, but that the grand jury believed there wasn't sufficient evidence to charge the landlord with criminal negligence. To Steve and me, it was never about what that boy did or didn't do. It was about our landlord's negligence, his failure to repair the broken heater, when he knew the device was faulty and that the consequences could be lethal. I need to say here the landlord was a California Highway Patrol officer. I need to say here that Steve and I wondered if the grand jury took his position under consideration and let him off the hook. In thinking about this now in the summer of 2020, how can I not ask why so little has changed since 1973? How can I not ask why systemic racism still exists in this country and why police brutality is tolerated, as is the killing of unarmed people of color? How can I not ask why, in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, politicians and their constituents refuse to accept the findings of science? How can I not ask how it's possible that a sitting president can commute the sentence of a convicted criminal even after the nation's attorney general deems the prosecution righteous? How can I not ask how it's possible for men of power to continue to berate, intimidate, and sexually abuse women? How can I not ask how it's possible for corporations to continue to pollute our oceans and destroy wildlife habitat? How can I not ask how the Trump administration can justify drilling for oil on America's most pristine land, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, when in 1997, William Jefferson Clinton signed the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act, in part to prevent this very action? How can I not ask how it's possible we're still lacking and tolerating accountability of human decency? How can I not ask? I'm 67 years old. I've got to ask. I don't have that much time left. I need to say here that I believe in good people. I believe they exist in police departments everywhere, in the House and the Senate, in Hollywood, in our own backyards, even when we're divided by politics as Steve and I were during the last 5 years of our marriage. I need to say that if I learned anything from the man I loved, the man I nursed from diagnosis to death, it's that everything we do, everything we are and strive to become, is hinged on optimism and hope. Hope is the belief that ultimately we'll do what's right, rather than what waylays critical thinking or lines our pockets. Because life is fragile, taken too easily, too cavalierly, and on occasion, snuffed by all things. A broken heater,